Have you ever actually stopped to think about where every single piece of food on Earth comes from? I mean, ultimately, literally every calorie you consume traces back to one singular, spectacular process. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're exploring the basis of all life on Earth, photosynthesis. But listen, we aren't going to look at it like a standard biology textbook. Instead, we're going to explore this as the ultimate, highly efficient microfactory. We're talking about a microscopic manufacturing plant operating inside every green leaf, taking thin air and sunlight and turning it into the fuel that powers our entire planet.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll start with the setup, then head inside the solar panels, catching sun, building sugar, the desert upgrade, and finally, factory limits.
All right, part 1, the setup, history, and anatomy.
Before we step onto the factory floor, let's set the stage a bit. For centuries, humans honestly didn't really understand what plants were up to. But look at how rapidly our understanding evolved. Back in 1770, Joseph Priestley realized plants somehow restore foul air. Fast forward to 1854, and Julius von Sachs figures out that plants are actually manufacturing glucose and storing it as starch. By 1888, Engelmann is mapping out exactly which colors of light drive this process. And then, by the 1930s, Cornelius von Neal definitively proves that this whole operation runs on light, using it to extract hydrogen to build sugars.
And this brilliantly illustrates where it all started. Think about Priestley's famous bell jar experiment. If you put a mouse and a lit candle in a sealed glass jar, the candle goes out and the mouse, well, unfortunately suffocates. But if you just add a simple mint plant into that closed space, the plant acts as a biological air purifier. It takes that foul air, which we now know as carbon dioxide, and converts it back into pure oxygen, keeping the mouse alive and the candle burning.
Moving on to part 2, inside the solar panels.
So we know the factory produces oxygen and sugar, but where is the actual machinery? Let's zoom right in from the leaf, past the cell walls, directly into the chloroplast. Notice those stacks that kind of look like green coins? Those are the grana, which are made up of a complex membranous system. This membrane is the literal solar panel of the plant, packed with pigments like chlorophyll that are perfectly designed to trap light energy. And surrounding those stacks is a fluid called the stroma, which essentially acts as the main assembly room.
Now, the really crucial point here is that this factory is divided into two very distinct shifts. First, we have the light reaction, happening right on those grana membranes. Its sole job is to trap sunlight and convert it into raw cellular energy, specifically molecules called ATP and NADPH. Then we have the dark reaction in the fluid stroma. And actually, dark doesn't mean it only happens at night, it just means it doesn't require direct light. It takes the energy generated by that first shift and uses it to physically build the sugar.
Which brings us to part 3, catching sun.
Let's look a bit closer at that first shift. How exactly does a biological leaf capture a beam of sunlight and turn it into usable, tangible electrical power? Well, it's a chaotic, incredibly fast-paced game of hot potato. The sheer elegance of the physics here in this Z-scheme is just incredible. Sunlight hits photosystem 2, and that energy excites an electron so much that it physically jumps up to an electron acceptor. As that electron flows downhill through an electron transport system, those blue arrows you see, it releases energy to charge up our cellular batteries, creating ATP. The electron then gets zapped by sunlight a second time over at photosystem 1, jumping up again to help create NADPH.
Now, the plant actually has two different ways to run this energy grid. It can run a cyclic loop using just photosystem 1 to pump out pure ATP, or it can run the full non-cyclic pathway we just looked at using both photosystems. But here's the absolutely amazing part. In that non-cyclic pathway, to replace the electrons that keep getting blasted away by the sun, the plant literally splits water molecules apart. That splitting of H2O releases oxygen as a byproduct. Seriously, take a deep breath right now. That oxygen in your lungs, it is the direct exhaust of this specific microscopic water splitting process.
All right, part 4, building sugar.
Okay, we've caught the sun and charged up our batteries. We have our ATP and NADPH. Now the pacing completely changes as we step away from the frantic light grid and step into the deliberate manufacturing floor of the stroma to actually build some food. This manufacturing process is called the Calvin cycle. I want you to keep these 3 sequential steps in your head. Step 1 is carboxylation, grabbing carbon dioxide out of the air. Step 2 is reduction, using our charged batteries to chemically alter it. And step 3 is regeneration, resetting the assembly lines so it can run all over again.
Let's move to the cycle and see how this actually builds. Right at the top, an incredibly important enzyme called rubisco grabs CO2 from the atmosphere and fixes it into a 3-carbon molecule. We then move down to the reduction phase, where the ATP and NADPH we made earlier drop off their energy, effectively forging the bonds that create a sugar precursor called triose phosphate. Finally, the cycle loops back up through regeneration, burning a little more ATP just to ensure the Rubisco enzyme has a fresh starting molecule waiting for the very next CO2.
But I really want to emphasize the immense scale of effort required here. Because CO2 only has one single carbon atom and glucose requires 6, it takes 6 full turns of this entire cycle just to produce one single molecule of glucose. That requires a massive biological budget. 18 ATP and 12 NADPH for just one sugar molecule. This factory is working incredibly hard.
Part 5. The Desert Upgrade.
So what happens when this factory is built in a hostile, scorching environment where the plant has to close its pores to save water, causing oxygen to just gum up the works? Well, the plant evolves a massive biological upgrade. We call these C4 plants. Think of things like corn and sugarcane. Unlike standard C3 plants, C4 plants evolved a highly specialized internal architecture called Cron's anatomy. They essentially redesigned the entire factory floor to completely prevent that wasteful photorespiration, using a different chemical called PEP to grab the CO2 first.
You can see the sheer difference in engineering here. Notice the standard C3 plant running the cycle all in one room, compared to the C4 plant, which has completely compartmentalized the factory into 2 separate rooms. It uses outer mesophyll cells to quickly snatch up CO2, turns it into a 4-carbon acid, and safely transports it deep inside to the inner bundle sheath cells. This keeps a really high concentration of CO2 packed around the Rubisco enzyme, meaning the assembly line runs perfectly efficiently, even in the blistering heat.
Finally, Part 6. Factory limits. Listen, every manufacturing plant in the world eventually hits a bottleneck. So what actually limits the output of this incredible natural machinery? The answer is beautifully summarized by Blackman's law of limiting factors. It basically states that if a process relies on multiple factors, like light, CO2, temperature, and water, the overall speed of the factory is completely dictated by whichever raw material is the scarcest. If you have infinite sunlight and perfect temperatures, but very little CO2, the plant can only produce sugar as fast as that tiny bit of CO2 allows. The scarcest resource controls the whole grid.
Which leaves us with a massive, real-world implication to think about. We're currently pumping unprecedented levels of CO2 into our atmosphere and driving up global temperatures. We are fundamentally altering the raw materials feeding the Earth's ultimate energy factory. So based on what we've learned today about limiting factors and factory efficiency, how do you think the world's plants are going to respond to this ultimate planetary scale test of Blackman's law? It is definitely something to think about the next time you look at a simple green leaf. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the incredible machinery all around us.